Your first thing you should think about is adding up to 7 and now multiplying to negative 30. So this one, since we're multiplying to negative 30, that means that one of them has to be positive and one of them has to be negative. In order for two numbers to multiply together to become a negative, one has to be positive and one has to be negative. So what that means is they actually need to subtract to give us 7. Because if I have one positive number and we're adding a negative number, that means it's going to turn into a subtraction. So now I'm looking for a difference of 7 because of that negative number. So I'm going to make my list of factors: 1, 30, 2, 15, 3, 10, 5, 6. Any of them subtract to give us 7, and that would be 3 and 10. I'm going to put my x at the beginning for both of them. I know that one of them will be 3 and one of them will be 10. Now I have to figure out which one is going to be positive and which one's going to be negative. And you have to think about, I want a positive 7. If you did positive 3 and negative 10, you would add those together and it would get negative 7, which is not what we want. We want positive 7, which means that the 10 needs to be positive, and then we need to subtract 3 out to get us to 7. So we knew that this now had to be a difference of 7 because this negative number right here means that we had to get a positive number and a negative number to multiply together to make a negative number. So we know that now it has to be a difference of 7 and not an addition of 7. Once we figure out which one of these numbers has a difference of 7, then we go back and we look, okay, which one will give us a difference of positive 7? If this was negative 7, it would be the other way around. It would be plus 3 and minus 10. So that's a little bit trickier. It's a little bit less straightforward than some of your previous numbers. And you can always double check. You can always choose one's positive and one's negative and go back and double check, and it'll tell you whether you got it right or not. Okay, and now we just practice. We just practice a ton because that's what it's going to take to make sure that we get it. It just takes a lot of practice. D, we see this negative guy here again. So what does that mean? Go ahead and do this on your own. So I've made a list of my factors to the side. I know that now I want a difference of 6 because I know one of them has to be positive and one of them has to be negative, which means we have 3 and 9. Since I know that I want a positive 6, that means I'm going to have a positive 9, and I'm going to subtract out 3. X minus 3 and x plus 9. Okay. This one's a little bit trickier because now we have two numbers that multiply to a positive 24, and then we've got a negative 10 here in the middle. Well, we can't really add two positive numbers because this would typically tell us that they need to add to give us 10, but we can't add two positive numbers to give a negative number. What's going on here is that we are actually adding two negative numbers because a negative times a negative will also give us a positive. So here we need two negative numbers that add up to or subtract, get further away from 0, 10. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. 124, 2, 12, 3, 8, 4, 6. Negative 4 and negative 6 will combine together through addition to make negative 10. Negative 4 minus 6 is negative 10. It also multiplies together to give us positive 24. So the rule of thumb here is that if you see a positive here, that means that it needs to add, those two numbers need to add to the middle term. Now, if it happens to be negative, then it's going to be two negative terms where these guys add up to negative 10. Whereas if it's a subtraction here, that means that you're looking for the difference of these two numbers to get the middle number. So a lot of kind of things to keep track about. We're just talking about different relationships that show up based off just of the signs. So now we've got -4 and -6. So I can write those out in my factored form. Here we've got a plus here, which means that this middle term needs to be the sum of two numbers that multiply to 3. There are only two numbers that multiply to 3, 1 and 3. Now, this needs to add to -4, which means that both of them need to be negative in order for them to combine to a negative number. Next one, we've got -30 and -13, which means we need one of them to be positive and one of them to be negative for them to multiply to a negative number, which means that their difference then needs to be 13. Of all of these, the one that has a difference of 13 is 2 and 15. This guy will subtract to give us 13. We just wanted to subtract to give us -13, which means that your 2 needs to be positive and your 15 needs to be negative. So we've got x plus 2 and x minus 15. All right, next practice problem. We want two numbers that multiply to -45. So we know one of them has to be positive and one of them has to be negative. And we know they need to combine together as a difference to make -4. If you don't need to do this factor list to the side, that is awesome. It is only a great way to organize your thoughts. If you feel like you are a process person, you really like formulas and processes to go through every single time, this might be just a nice way that if you get stressed out about something, you just go through this process every single time in order to figure it out. If you're somebody that just likes to do it in your head and go, awesome. Just make sure you're double checking your work. All right, so a difference of 4, hopefully you realize, is 5 and 9. Since we want a difference of -4, that means that we're going to do a +5 and a -9. Because 5 minus 9 is going to be -4. So that becomes x plus 5, x minus 9. Just to let you know, it is also the same thing as x minus 9 and x plus 5. It does not matter what order you put it in, as long as 9 stays negative and 5 stays positive. Box it and move on. Okay, so we've got a little bit trickier problems. First of all, with this guy, you should make sure to reorder your problem so your x squared or your highest exponent is always in the beginning. So you've got 5x squared minus 45x plus 70. And we have not talked about this yet today in notes with these practice problems, although we did talk about it at the beginning. We need to always make sure we look for your greatest common factor. And there is a greatest common factor here, which is nice because you don't know how to deal when A is not 1. So when we are factoring, you cannot just divide by 5 and get rid of it. It has to stay there. This isn't trying to simplify this. This is trying to, well, it is trying to simplify it, but it's not trying to get rid of things, like how you get really focused on getting rid of things when you're solving for an equation. This is not an equation because there isn't an equal sign. We're not solving for anything, we're just simplifying. If we get rid of the 5 and just make it go away, we have now fundamentally changed the expression that is here. It is no longer the same expression. So you have to make sure to keep that 5 there, or else you are fundamentally changing what the root of that expression is. So what you do is you just take out 5. X squared minus 9x plus 50, 20, 14. I think. And now we can focus on two numbers that multiply to 14. It's positive, which means they either are both positive or both negative. And since it's a negative 9 here, that means I know that they are both negative. So two numbers that multiply to 14 and then add to negative 9. And we know that that's going to be, if you want to make your list of factors great, it's going to be negative 2 and negative 7. So we do 5 times x minus 2 times x minus 7. And that is your final answer. I want you to try this last guy on your own. You are going to take out a greatest common factor, and I will also tell you that having a negative 1 there in the front is really tough and it changes it. So what if you also factored out a negative 1? So if I factor out a negative 1, I'd be left with x cubed minus x squared minus 2x. So now you see we've got a 1 as a coefficient in here, which is great. It is not the only greatest common factor though. We've also got an x in every single one of these terms, so we can take that out as well. I'm now going to make that negative x. It's going to become x squared minus x minus 2. Now we keep the negative x here. Now we think to ourselves, what are two numbers that multiply to negative 2 and their difference is negative 1? There are only two numbers that multiply to 2. It's 1 and 2. One of them has to be positive and one of them has to be negative. If you make this a positive 1 and a negative 2, they will subtract together to make negative 1. Negative x times x plus 1 times x minus 2. And there you go. That's the hardest problem of your notes today. I will see you in class.